If you get the business pieces right, which largely can end up being administrative, it means that the creativity, strategy, hirings that you want to make ahead of the curve all become a lot more possible. You get your profitability to the right level.
Hello and welcome back to Agency Acquisitions and Exits. I'm your host, Peter Lang. Today I welcome Barry Dudley. Not only does Barry have many decades of experience working in marketing services, media, tech, and communications, he also has been involved in over 50 transactions and due diligence assignments from small creative agencies, design agencies, to billion-dollar technology deals. He is the corporate finance advisor you need in your back pocket when you're trying to scale, grow, or acquire, and ultimately exit. With over 20 years, you need to take what Barry says to heart. He's a partner at Green Square, and I'm excited for you to understand the importance of corporate finance in your desires to acquire and exit. So let's dive in. Barry, thank you for joining me.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. For everyone who's listening, you have an interesting backstory, and I know this is going to be partnered with some valuable takeaways for the listener. So help us set the stage here. What's your backstory? Help us understand the journey and the context for the information you're going to share today.
So I began as a chartered accountant, trained many, many years ago now, but with a West End firm that primarily acted for creative agencies, media agencies, production, people businesses. But that was its expertise. So a boring old auditor, but in a pretty exciting sector, it certainly was for me. Spent a lot of time with some great names in the UK, BBH, Mother, Rennie Kelly Campbell Rolfe, St Luke's, were all names at the time. A good few years ago. Did my time there, very exciting, then jumped to what was Arthur Andersen and started working with WPP, Omnicom, Havas, helping them buy all the clients that I used to act for in the original practice that I was in. So did a lot of deals. WPP would have at that time anywhere up to 35 transactions on the go around the world. And I'd be working on a good number of those. And with the other networks too. Did that for a good while. Enron blew up Andersen, which became Deloitte. I survived the culling there, continued forwards with Deloitte, but got to a decision point of, do I stay in practice forever, or do I jump into one of these agency businesses that I spend all my time analysing and digging around? And I made the leap. I joined Naked Communications, which is a media comms planning business. At the time, it was in its third year. That was 2003. 20 odd people in the UK. They wanted to go around the world and they wanted to sell themselves. So very certain from the outset, that's part of the journey. Roll forward 5 years. We'd gone to 12 countries. And we sold in 2008. Over that time, it was a JV with Dentsu. We had ventures with Lowe, McCann in the Nordics, all sorts. So lots of exciting adventures, lots of lessons learned, lots of things got wrong, some things got right. Did the deal, 4 years, earn out. Stepped away at the end of that. And since then, I've been with Green Square, where we bring that advice. Fellow partners have got very similar backgrounds, and because we've had a foot in sort of both sides of the fence, we hope to bring a decent amount of value to help people get themselves into shape and find a partner to move forwards with. Is that enough, or is that too much?
Well, the good news is you scratched the surface and you dropped such little hints of periods of times, interactions, and stories. And I know we don't have enough time to cover it. Maybe connect the dots for a moment. Green Square, you are corporate finance advisors to this industry that is very different than corporate finance. Maybe before you share some nuggets and some wisdom for the listener, what was the difference between, having your right foot in accounting and finance, and then when you made the transition to marketing services and agency, what was the biggest contrast?
It's really good question. When I had stepped out from one world into another, as in I was in practice, financial services professional. I'm now the CFO to become a COO, but was a CFO at the outset, with no peers around me. Whereas in practice, I had all the peers around me. Equally, I'm now a commercial person within a creative business. So my output underpins the real output. In professional services, the output was what the professional services firm did. I didn't really realize that difference mattered quite a lot until I then stepped back out of it into Green Square, where the service we're now providing is the output of our business. So it got a bit lonely to the back end, where I had my partners who were doing the delivery of the service, and I wasn't. I was underpinning that. I had people that worked for me, but they weren't for me, they weren't my peers. I had to go and see the competitors to find people like me to talk to. I loved it and enjoyed it, but now I'm the other side. But bringing a business perspective into a very creative world where often none of the founders have got a business background. So I've got a bit of both. And I think that's what helps, and same for the other partners with similar upbringings, that I bring a bit of business along with having a creative outlook and understanding those sorts of businesses.
I often say the corporate folks are foreigners in the marketing world. When you think about the struggles you had getting priorities communicated to those agency partners when you're in the day-to-day, how similar is that to the struggles in communicating the important numbers and the corporate matters to the clients in Green Square now?
One of the things that I use most commonly around the numbers is, and the commercial side of things and getting people to understand the business. If you get the business pieces right, which largely can end up being administrative if you've got them running well, it means that the creativity, strategy, hirings that you want to make ahead of the curve all become a lot more possible. So if you get the nuts and bolts right, you run it well, you get your profitability to the right level, you create freedom. So the numbers, if you're doing it right, aren't a thing that get in the way. You get them right, put them to the side because you're getting them right, and get on with being brilliant. And getting people to understand that, it can unlock a lot of things. When I put timesheets in at Naked, don't I? People were poring over the reports that came back, understanding how certain accounts worked. You've just got to go about these things in the right way. But educating around business can make creativity more possible. Innovations, let's spend 10% of our time on internal projects. You can't do that when you're struggling with a low margin, when you haven't got on top of your cash flow. Get on top of both those things, and you can do that. There was a point where St. Luke's had done so well in their early years. They set some parameters where they could only ever have 10 clients. If another client was going to come in, the whole firm had to decide who was going to go. You could only ever have 10. So that meant when you were looking for a 10th one, and you probably lost one, but no one knows that. Right, look, we've got that 10th one that comes in is really excited. That was compelling. They also had a minimum fee. So look, unless you're going to spend this much a year, it just doesn't work within our 10. Immediately you set the bar for the conversation on the math that you're going to have. Again, a good few years back, the world was a little bit simpler, but they got it right. They ended up with a massive lump of cash very, very quickly. And there was a debate at one of their AGMs where everyone is allowed to say what they say. All salaries are on a notice board, so everyone knows what everyone earns. Equity was distributed each year, an equal amount based on how much profit was made. There was an amount of equity. Everyone got the same amount. The longer you were there, the more you had, but a very, very advanced structure. Big lump of cash. What do we do with it? It was a piece of art that was going to be leaving the UK. An American buyer, I think, was going to take it. We should buy it to keep it in the country, was one of the things. Another one was to take over St. Luke's school. So same name, East London. And it's not a school at the moment, but we'll live in it. We'll put profits in the future towards regenerating it into a school. Now, if they hadn't had their financial structures and their ways of doing things in place, they wouldn't have been able to do those sorts of creative things. Don't ask me what they ended up doing. I can't remember, but it sort of shows how the maths and getting the commercials right can create freedom.
The proper way is the professional way. And starting off professional from the beginning makes all the creative bits and your passions so much easier and sustainable. And then you just described the impact it can have. Jack Stack famously wrote The Great Game of Business, where the control over the business goes to the people running it. And it's amazing what people, when contributing to the earnings and ultimately how those earnings are deployed, when they're involved, where it goes is just inspiring. It's a great mission and vision that this company holds. You stress something as a takeaway, which is starting the numbers in the beginning, focusing on it, making sure you get those right, creates the space for creativity and freedom. You are a CFO into a COO. How long does that take when you come in as someone trying to fix a company? I think that a lot of people who listen to this might not be in that current state. They might be in need of help, and I like the help you guys provide, but they're intimidated because they think it's a big lift or it can take many years or they have to do something before that. Help us understand, what does that transformation look like?
I think the building blocks of this is very, very simple monthly reporting, that all of the people that need to be in that reporting or understand that reporting look at and share. Let's say you've got a board of 4 25% shareholders. All 4 of them deliver services to the client. None of them are a CFO. And perhaps you've got a chairman as a non-exec to keep you straight. You want to have a set of management accounts put to that board meeting once a month, a P&L, a balance sheet, and some basic KPIs. And that needs to be looked at from one month to the next. And it needs to just be sinking into people's brains. We're a little bit behind on the pipeline at the moment. I can see we've got a few tough months coming up. I remember a time at Naked where we were stepping to a lot of countries, and the UK was where we began. That's where all the financials and the money and the funding came to start in other countries. We never borrowed a penny. We were making the profits to make that happen. And I forget which country we were heading to next, but there was normally a partner and myself would be doing various trips to get that country moving. We'd go do our trip. Right, next time we go, we're going to meet so-and-so and so-and-so, who we think could be the founding partners. We've got Coca-Cola, Unilever and Nokia here, there and everywhere. We've got a couple of conversations with them when we're next in the market. Let's move it on. And one of the partners came to me and said, we're due another trip out there. How are we doing on our numbers? And go, well, actually, the UK just softened a little bit. I think we should just push back the next trip by a month or so. Make sure that we're in a good place. The partners went away, rushed around, filled the hopper back up again. Can I go now? but we were watching it month to month. So you just need simple P&L and balance sheet monthly. Now that sounds obvious, but when we first look in on a company, way more often than not, they have nothing like proper numbers. They might be quarterly. They may well be monthly, but it's just a P&L. It's not a balance sheet. Perhaps it's just a spreadsheet. It's not even on Xero or some sort of financial system. These can be big businesses that really aren't on top of those things. So just monthly reporting of the basics with some KPIs. So pretty much in the 20 odd years that I've been around this sector, these ratios have been the same. So profit, so your net profit, operating profit, EBITDA, they're all similar things, but pretty much your profit before tax, that is divided into your gross profit or net revenue. So turnover, take off your cost of sales, bought in costs, you've got your net revenue or GP, whichever one you want to call it. Your profit against that number should be 20 to 25%. You're doing well. You're above it, you're doing even better. Below it, you should be a bit higher, but that's the kind of band to go for. Ratio 1, ratio 2, staff costs against that GP or net revenue. That should, in a perfect world, be 55% to 60%. That's an efficient business. And if you're at that level, your 20 to 25% of profitability should fall out. That's your second ratio. And the third one is just how's my net revenue, my gross profit growing? Is that on a nice trajectory? That's all you need to talk about from one month to the next on those numbers. But you get that routine in, you have those numbers done on time, regularly, close to the month having finished, not a month and a half later. Just get those things started. Now, one of the steps, though, is putting money behind someone to do that. And that is a big step. It's an overhead. It's an extra cost. Oh, we'll keep doing it ourselves. It's a real false economy. That the moment, if you haven't got those things in place, that you then put them in place, what you start to see, how you judge the business when there's a new piece of work coming along and you're going, look, if we're going to shift this margin from 18% that we don't seem to be able to get above 20 that Barry keeps telling us about, we've got to win a big piece of work, really, haven't we? And these 3 little briefs that we've got in at the moment, we're going to do one because I know the staff are really motivated by it. There's a cause behind it. We're going to do that. But these other 2, we're going to say no. Or we're going to say, yes, we will do it, but the budget's this. When you've got someone in that false economy of spending money on a financial controller or 2 days a week of a interim CFO, you really should get hold of that and get these basics running quickly. And I think it's all of those 4 people I mentioned that need to understand these numbers. They may not touch them from one month to the next for 3 of them, but say one of them is a chief exec, they're going to be living and breathing them a lot more. The others still need to know them, still need to be aware.
When I'm often speaking in front of agency owners who don't have a finance director, a controller, or a CFO, they ask this question: when is the right time to bring on that person? And sadly, it's yesterday as the common answer. But let's walk through the agency journey and say, when does it usually make sense? And then at what degree of involvement? And then let's tie this to selling the business, right? That end state, kind of run it from starting the agency to selling it. Explain the contribution of corporate finance or the finance side throughout that journey.
So I think you need it. Yesterday is the answer. So if you haven't got it, the answer is yesterday. But I would want any business, whatever stage they're at, to have at least a day a month of a grown-up CFO. And there's a lot of those sorts of people around. So you may not have loads of numbers to be looking at yet, But all these things that I'm waffling on about now, they'll be putting them in from the word go, telling you to get on with it. And that may well mean that you need to have a bit of time of a bookkeeper, but I'd have that interim CFO person now, irrespective of your size. And then they will know when to grow more of their time into it, or perhaps hand on to someone that can be more hands-on, because that's not part of the portfolio of what the initial person you might have worked with does. So I think you should always have a very grown-up interim CFO to some degree or another. And the finance team will just develop depending on the skills of the people that have founded the business. They may be able to do the initial 6-month spreadsheets, but then the moment you're into, I need this on a proper accounting system, that's where the bookkeeper's in. So you need a bookkeeper as a minimum from the word go, and access to that sort of CFO person, and they just grow as time moves on.
What would be the thresholds? $1 million in turnover, $1 million in revenue, number of team members, number of clients, complexity of the business. Because you use an example of an agency that had 10 clients, right? And they didn't grow much. They wanted to stay 10 clients strong. That's not a lot of billing, Barry, right? That's not a heavy lift from a full-time bookkeeper potentially. When do you see size becoming a factor in an internal accounting priority, personnel, CFO, and then let's connect that to selling, right? You help companies acquire, you help them sell, you've been in the trenches with them. What does it look like as you get close to that? We're taking M&A seriously now.
Well, I think let's say you are only 5 people. You're going to be, certainly in the UK, above a VAT, so a sales tax reporting level. Just doing the returns that you need to do for that, you need someone on board to be doing those things: payroll, deducting PAYE, national insurance, etc. You've got to have someone from the word go. I don't think there is a point where it goes from X to Y. You've got to have someone at the outset, and you've got to have someone at a very senior level just looking down, making sure that you're gathering that team as it goes by. I think when it comes to going to market, so imagine that you think you've got to a place where you want to see if there's a partner out there to move forwards to help accelerate growth, whatever it might be. You've got to have, in a perfect world, a slick machine. This is why it's such a subject for me. It very rarely is the case. They want to do a deal, quite probably can do the deal. Their maths are so rarely in a position to be taken into those sorts of conversations. I often give the analogy when you're piecing together a set of numbers, say 3-year historicals and some forward-looking numbers. Can I have those, please? The last 3 years numbers, top 10 clients by month, and a forecast forwards on a similar basis. Yeah, no problem. 3 months later, you've still had nothing. And they don't have that kind of, well, we were on one system, then we moved to another system, and then this happened, and then that happened. And I give the analogy of when I take in a due diligence file, WPP were looking at one stage, we looked at a design agency in Stockholm that came up with the original Absolute bottle design. So that sort of rounded top vodka bottle. It was a well-known design business. I've got my little report done in the format that's needed, but back then a paper file and very clever referencing backwards and forwards. I'd learned that if that file is very neat and tidy and the partner gets it, you've got the designated meeting, they're going to, I'll look at that later. I've got to get on with something else. They'll be through it in a flash. If I've got a scruffy bit of paper, they're nervous immediately. They pick out a document. Right, where's the supporting analysis for this? I can't find. You're in a heap of trouble. So take that to, I want to see those 3-year financials, which you'll get into when the DD teams get in there. This is just me, your friend, asking you at the moment. can't put that very neat looking package in front of people, you're going to be in trouble. So getting these things right now is important. A client wanted to go to market straight away. It was 6 months before we got the financials to a place where people were happy. It's disappointing, but just not uncommon. And I think that if you've got all of those together, the next massive thing within the numbers that takes quite a bit of working through, that's what you've actually done. Well, within that, there's quite a few unusual things. We need to normalize those numbers. That's a term that is very common in our world, but is often alien to someone that's been running their business. What do you mean? So, okay, at the moment, you pay yourself through dividends. That doesn't appear in staff costs. So the profit that you're showing is way higher than it should be. When you've sold your company, if you sell 100% of it, you don't have shares anymore. You can't have dividends. You need a salary. And that needs to be a market rate. You put that in, and suddenly your profit's not where you thought it was. You were managing towards 20%, but without perhaps 2 or 3 people's salaries in it. And they're big salaries. So one normalization area. Go the other way round, though. We've got a client at the moment that has operations around the world. They've just begun in one market 7 months ago. We've got 7 months of losses in that market, not unusual, expecting to get to break even in its second year. Well, we've normalized out the whole of that loss. We've left the revenue in, we've left the cost of sales in, we've left the costs in, but we then literally made an adjustment equal to the loss to bring it to zero. So when they're looking at what this might be once they've bought it, it's not going to be loss-making going forwards. It's going to hopefully make a profit, but we've not pushed it. We've just left it at break even. That's a more normal picture. So if you haven't even got your numbers right in the first place, to start doing these sorts of things, you suddenly, no one's got a clue what's going on. So very important to get those sorts of things right. I'll come on to one other area in a moment, but I'll let you ask the next question, which I can see you're bursting with.
This goes into, I want to double tap on the normalization of numbers. In selling a business, everyone hears about adjustments that they have to make, and normalization is a form of adjustment. But they typically think, oh, I'm going to add stuff to EBITDA to increase the value. And you've presented very clearly how buyers go, I appreciate this enthusiasm for the current profitability of the business, but here's the things you didn't factor into its operation that we are going to then discount or revalue the business at.
Yep.
How disappointing is that for those owners, especially if they don't come prepared?
It's one of my millions of learnings as to how to go through these sorts of conversations. It's very normal for people to just not comprehend that to begin with. Haven't I done well? If I choose to pay myself not very much, it's up to me. Absolutely the case. When you own it, the moment it's sold, they want a sustainable business. That's got to have a market rate salary in it. And let's say there's a deal that you've done where the deal lasts for 4 years. They're not buying you for 4 years, they're buying you for 40 years. They want to have this thing running sustainably on the way through. And you would use the word discount there, and I know exactly what you meant. It's not a discount, it's the right price, because you're bringing in the right cost. There's some things that we'll get into disagreements with people about whether it should or shouldn't be adjusted. But once you've got to the right kind of number, that's the right number. Where you were was the wrong number. So getting people to understand that's quite hard. Well, look, through a deal is based on profit. Why do I want to put my salary in there? Again, well, you need to have a salary in there, because the moment the deal's finished, the salary will suddenly go in there because you're not getting any deal money anymore. So that goes in now. You've got to have that in at a market rate. There's a good few that go the other way, and there's a few that come off. But again, doing that exercise, if you haven't got the numbers to rely on decently in the first place, it's very hard to pull out those sorts of things to improve them, say, or to bring them down by putting in the salaries, but then bring them up because you've done a very big office refit, which you do once every 5 years. A lot of the costs weren't capitalised onto the balance sheet, did go through the P&L. We take them out. You've got a bad debt of £70,000 where someone's just not paid up. That's hit your profit. We put that straight back in and lift the profit up. It's happened once in the last 10 years of the business. It's not normal. We put it back in. So that exercise, getting the numbers to say, what did you actually do? Then going, well, what's normal is different. I've got one example when I was doing the DD again with Anderson. Someone had a truffle farm going through the business. The farm was capitalised when he bought it in the first place on the balance sheet, but there was these running costs that were passing through the profit and loss account. What are those? They weren't even thinking about it. It's been there. It's traditionally processed. These costs were going out for maintenance or whatever it might have been. But £30,000 straight back into your profit and loss account because that truffle farm's coming out when the deal happens. Someone's not buying that part. And the costs that were with it come out as well. Your profit's just gone up.
Re-emphasize this for the listener. You want to be working in the real numbers in a business.
Yep.
You don't want to be educated to the real numbers in the business when you're looking to exit.
Yeah, you want to be in control. You want to know what you're taking into conversations. You want to know where you may be challenged, and you may be pushing certain areas, knowing that in some of them you're going to get pushed back. But you've got to know. You've got to know your levers. You've not got to be surprised. And if you've got a reasonable idea of what the value is going to be, and that just about works, if you know you've got a few things that are risky, you're almost certainly not going to end up with the money that you're after.
Oftentimes people don't end up with the money that they're after. Maybe we can unpack that a bit. People get presented an offer. Let's say they off of real numbers. And in this purchase agreement, it has future expectations of corporate performance. And if they don't have a corporate advisor sitting next to them, they might say ambitiously and optimistically, I'm going to hit all of those milestones and I'm going to hit my total obtainable value. From your experience and from your shepherding of deals, how many of those deals hit the outcomes that the sellers were looking for, and how many of them fall short?
Well, I think that when you go into the deal, what lands at the outset has got to be something that makes you feel happy, if that might be the only thing you ever get.
And emphasizing, we're talking about cash on close.
Cash on day one.
Yeah, guaranteed cash day one.
Yep. So that can be whatever proportion of the total that you might be getting. It could be quite a small proportion, but it's got to be an amount of money where you go, if COVID comes along in the next 4 years, again, nothing I could have done about that. I'm unlucky, but actually that amount that I got makes me feel good. I still believe I'm going to come back out of it, but it's kind of messed up the deal. You've got to be reasonably happy at the outset. I think the trick for successful periods thereafter is where you're getting the integration, the chemistry, alignment on growth, somewhere that you're very happy, that you're going to have a chance of delivering what you said, but albeit with their input to make your business better. So with Felix's expertise within the machinery of a business, say, and because you're in a broader network, we're going to take you to a higher level again. So you're going to outperform where you're going to get to. Now, if you've got very comfortable about how all that's going to come together, you've got a very high chance of it working. If you're crossing your fingers and perhaps have negotiated every bell and whistle to maximize this and maximize that, that tends to end up being the sort of situation that doesn't work. where you've gone in, everyone's happy, excited, motivated, then that's going to work. If you've pushed it too far, often acquirers will look to try and grab something back off of you further down the line, and it's not where you want to be. And it's again part of the I've learned how to handle the sort of conversation. Well, right, so I'm excited about doing this M&A process. Never done it before. So you get 4 or 5 people lined up, and then there's a bidding war, and it goes up and up and up and up and up and up. And you go, no, it virtually never goes like that. And if you think you're going to sell it like that, you've probably got a widget factory, not a creative services business. We're going to find you, hopefully, 2 or 3 places where it's going to be hard to work out what you're going to enjoy working in the most. It's then our job to make sure that we create as best an environment around that to maximize the return for you. And part of that return is intangible. I've absolutely loved the challenge of what I'm doing. I've been relocated to New York because that's where we needed to concentrate what we were doing, and I always wanted to go there. That's not money, but that's bringing personal value back to you. And we'll get the maths to work as well. So I think it's where you've got things mapped out. Yes, you've got a set of numbers to aim towards, but if you're going in where everyone understands what they're trying to achieve and it works and it fits and it feels good, it's very likely to work.
When you're trying to set expectations in the deal and you're giving them this sage advice, how often does it not hit, Barry? How often do people just not get it? And they ultimately don't sell, they don't move forward with the opportunity. And then, because that's an important bit. I've heard a lot of companies, 80% of businesses that are listed to sell never sell. There's a great amount of businesses that miss the peak or miss selling before their peak, and then they ultimately start shrinking, reducing in size, and then the owner's last deal is to minimize and shut down the company. How hard is this for the owner to hear?
It's pretty hard, but we spend a lot of time setting out the spectrum of what might be possible, and we will have examples, parallels, and context that we can give to people to say, look, your table has just got one slightly wobbly leg. At the moment, you're 25% dependent on one particular client. In an ideal world, that would be 15 or less, but you're at 25. That's not great, but it's not the end of the world. Come to negotiation, it will be thrown at you again and again and again. And whatever multiple has been put in front of you, that will move. So at the moment, you've got a few areas that need to be worked on. I want to get as much money as I possibly can for you, because part of what I get is a percentage of the price that's paid. So it's in my interest to get as far as I can. But we can only do so much, and here's where you sit. And we spend a lot of time with people, setting context, give examples of where we think it's going to get to, and then it's down to all of us to try to make that happen. Now, the thing that's changed, and what you're doing in the groups that you're building, there's a lot of different ways in which deals are done now. A traditional earnout that was pretty much the way all of the big groups did it back in the 2000s when I was doing the stuff with WPP, it was an earnout. You sold 100%, you got an amount of money now, and depending on how you grew and what your margins were, you got more money at 2 further points in time. Very, very simple. I've seen a transaction structure for a group recently where they buy 10% of you for 10% of this year's revenue. They then buy another 10% of you next year and next year, and they get up to 51%. So the 5th year, they buy 11%. And hopefully over that time, they've been helping you grow. So that percentage of the revenue, you're getting a bit more. 49% just sits with you. Then when that group sells itself, you sell your 49% at that time as well. So I will have almost certainly with that client put in a traditional earnout would look like this. This doesn't look anything like that, but is it exciting? Well, it is, because I've now spoken to the people that I'm going to deal with. I only need X. So actually, if you can get them to buy 20% of me, not 10 in the first year, I'm happy to do that. And I'm really motivated by it. And the fact that I've got 49% could be 6, 7, 8 years down the line, could be never. I'm going to get dividends on that because I still own it. And if and when it does sell, it's going to be valued at what a very big group sells for, not what I might have got myself. So as well as managing sort of, well, what am I going to get across the whole of the life of a deal conversation, there is well, it could be very different in structure. And there's a lot of those sorts of structures around.
There's been a dramatic shift in the way deals are structured from the traditional way, as you outlined, possibly because of a few really solid reasons. One is there's a lot of businesses for sale. People don't understand the amount of companies that were managed by baby boomers, amount of service firms that are no longer being inherited by their children and don't have really strong succession plans in place. And so when you look at the options for sellers, if you only have this view of the deal you can get being very binary, right? Cash up front and earn out, it limits the amount of conversations you can really have with prospective sellers. If you're more open to creative joint venture type structures where you're really transitioning the growth, the prosperity, and the future of the agency into the next version with a partner, there's a lot of deals you can do out in the world now, and a lot of people who are interested in helping you get there. If we were to bookend, Barry, your many, many decades of experience into what you feel is the most important takeaways, the priorities for the listeners, for the business owners, what's that advice look like? And I know you touched on a few of them already.
Well, I think I'll repeat the three that are the biggest for us. So the maths that we've talked about a decent amount today, getting on top of your numbers, understanding those numbers, normalizations, etc. Really, really important. And you will, if you are not that strong on it at the moment, very quickly see the benefit of investing a bit of time into that first one. Second one, client overdependency. You can't overnight change those sorts of things. But if you've got that kind of challenge, you're probably going to limit the buyer pool that you've got, but just be aware of that. And I think something you've just touched on there, which is the transition from one set of owners to another set of owners to perhaps just employees incentivized with very clever long-term incentive plans. What you're doing with that next tier of people and how they flow through a deal. Those three areas are big ones to work around.
And if someone who's listening to this wants to reach out to you, Barry, maybe they just have some questions or they want to work directly with Green Square, how can they best do that?
Hopefully you'll find me relatively easily on LinkedIn, but if not, just email me, barry.dudley@gsquare.co.uk.
Awesome. Barry, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for putting up with me and listening to my waffle.
Before we let you go, be sure to follow me on Instagram or on LinkedIn. And if you get value from this episode, make sure to share it with at least one person who you think could benefit from our conversation today. If you'd like to be on our show or know of someone who should be, email us at info@agencyacquisitionandexits.com.